What's your name, man? You new and upcoming, but you're at this summit. What's your name? Where you from?
My name Nipsey Hussle. I'm from LA, Slauson and Crenshaw area. You know.
Okay, well, Nipsey Hussle, that's named after Nipsey Russell, the
Correct.
comedian.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about yourself, man. What brings you up here, up and coming, and how come you're not blinging and having all kind of crazy diamonds and all that? I guess you here to get your money right, huh?
All the time. I mean, all that is cool for the image and all that, but all them is liabilities. You feel me? I'd rather invest in some real estate. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, wait, can you repeat that again, man? You're up and coming artist. What did you say you want to do?
I say invest in some assets as opposed to trick off my money on some liabilities like diamonds. You know what I'm saying? Cars that lose value as soon as you drive them off the lot.
So you're trying to get land.
Exactly, homie. A real asset. Take care of my peoples, cause it look good, but at the end of the day, you losing value, homie. It ain't appreciating. It's depreciating. It's losing value.
What do you think? Why do you think it's so hard for people to get that message? One half you get guys that say they got to impress the females. Female ain't trying to talk to you unless you blinged out. On the other hand, you got other people feel like they got to show off to the homies and impress them with their riches. I mean, what do you think is how do we get that out of that mindset?
I mean, I feel like that's insecurity. Material things ain't nothing. You feel me? At the end of the day, it's who you is. You wasn't born with it. You gonna die without it. So if you feel you need some diamonds or some jewelry to get at a female, it's because you feel you lack something within yourself. You know what I mean? So all that, as far as that angle, it's like I feel that's insecurity.
Hi, my name is Attorney Broderick Brown. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of California, and today I want to break down that clip from Nipsey Hussle that you just heard. That's a great clip. It's one of his first interviews, and he talked about assets over liabilities. Now, when he gave that interview, he was still an up-and-coming rapper, and so let's see today whether or not he achieved his goals and whether or not he acquired assets over liabilities, and if he lived by the words that he had said almost 2 decades before his death. And so before we get into the details from the court documents, I want to explain why we know this. So if someone dies without a living trust, their estate has to go through the probate court. And the probate court is basically a public filing. A judge will decide how a person's estate is divvied up. And so when Nipsey died, he didn't have a living trust. And so his estate, who are his 2 children, basically had to go through the probate process. And so the only reason we know this information is because he didn't have a living trust. So if you take one thing away from this video, is if you have assets, whether it be a pension, 401k, a home, gold, etc., you want to make sure that you consult with a living trust attorney so that you can get your estate in order. And for me, it's preferable to have a living trust than simply to have a will, but you need to consult with your own attorney. This is not legal advice, but let's get into the documents. As a part of the estate, the probate estate, every so often, the executor of the estate has to give an inventory and appraisal of the estate to let the judge know what the value of the estate is and what's still in the estate. And so I've broken down his assets into a pie chart. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through it on the document and then discuss it on the pie chart. Excuse me. So these were his cash bank accounts as of, this is a fall of 2020 document that I got from the court. And so he had about $11,000 in cash. Even with the earlier inventories, he didn't have a ton of cash. And this is important because, Dame Dash always talks about this, is that he always has his cash working for him. And so you'll see a lot of wealthier people will not hold a lot of cash. In the words of Grant Cardone, cash is trash. And so Nipsey didn't have a lot of cash, and we'll get into the rest of his estates. And obviously I redacted the bank accounts because it's none of you guys' business what where he has his accounts. So they list down other assets. TuneCore would be the songs he has on TuneCore. There's an associated value with that. His brother owes him some money, apparently. There's a value with that. Now, these are his gold necklaces, and he has a Rolex watch. He's got quite a few gold necklaces. I think he has one Rolex, and his Rolex is a presidential 18 karat model that they appraise it at $15,000. And then he's got a custom bedazzle, which is $6,000. Now, a lot of times people invest in gold and Rolex watches because they tend to hold value, and sometimes they'll appreciate as well. And so so even though in the video he talks about not having a lot of material things, the reality is he was a hip hop star. He was a hip hop star, and in a lot of his photos, whether it's the photo where he's wearing the Chamberlain jersey sitting courtside at the Laker game, he has that gold because that's good for his business. And since he had the money, chances are those gold necklaces are going to maintain some value. So I don't know what he paid for it, but the gold he had clearly wasn't worthless. And so let's go to the next part. This is more jewelry, furnishing. What's interesting to note about his estate is he only owned one car, and it's a 2012 Chevy Suburban, because he obviously, if you followed his social media at the time, he had Mercedes luxury cars, but chances are that those cars were being leased, which is again potentially a smart business move, depending on how he had it set up. Because if you own a car, it's a depreciating asset, whereas if you lease it, chances are, given it his role as an entertainer, if he's using those cars in promotional videos, he may be able to write off some amount of the lease payment. But Nip owned quite a few businesses. Now, not every business he owned had value. There's quite a few corporations on this page and the next page that had an assessed value of 0, meaning they had no assets. But some of his corporations did have assets. Now, what's interesting to note, Nipsey didn't own any real estate in his name, and I think I'm going to make another video discussing the plaza that people say he owns. He in fact does not own that plaza, but it's unclear whether or not one of his corporations, in particular the All Money In Inc., has an interest in the corporation that does own the plaza, because the corporation that does own the plaza is not listed in his assets, but he made it have formed a partnership with one of his LLCs, and one of his LLCs has an interest in that property. And so they also break down his trademark holdings, and that's basically the inventory. So let's get into the breakdown. So I made this chart, and his biggest asset was his All Money In LLC. Now, again, it's unclear what exactly the assets are within the LLC. They don't have to disclose that. So we won't know. And then when you go on the California State registry to look up a corporation, that's not going to give you an indication as to, what the business is actually doing and what its actual assets are. So that's private information that, quite frankly, we'll never get. His second biggest holding is the second biggest holding is his trademark portfolio. And I believe this has increased greatly after his death. So because he owned his masters and because of his publishing and royalties, this asset continues to grow. I won't be surprised if eventually the trademark asset exceeds whatever the All Money In LLC holds. So that's something that we'll continue to look into as long as this probate is still going. It's unclear. I'm not a probate attorney, but so I can't really say based upon the documents that I've read how much longer the probate's going to go on. But the next time I see a new filing, I will update you guys. If you're interested, let me know in the comments. His next biggest holding is the Marathon Clothing Company, Inc. And I believe he owns a third of that with a couple other, I think he owns a part, his brother owns a part, and Karen Civil owns another part. That's my understanding. His next biggest asset is the Marathon Touring, Inc. And again, it's not clear what is in that corporation. It could be money. It could be a percentage of real estate. It's not clear, except that the assessed value was $606,000, and that made up 6.5% of his estate. Now, if someone were to watch that video and see this section of his estate and get into hater mode and say, well, Nipsey's saying that you shouldn't buy jewelry and material, and he's got, a $15,000 Rolex, and he's got close to $80,000 in gold necklaces, etc. If they were to do that level of hate, the reality is that his material assets made up a really small portion of his overall net worth. His jewelry made up 3.1%. His accounts receivable were 2.1%. That's money that's owed to him. He had $21,000 in furnishing, which is, given his net worth, that's really reasonable. And so even though he said that in the video when he was a young man in the early 2000s, the reality is that not only did he live up to what he said, his assets over liability and, material things ain't nothing. He lived by that ultimately. And so I think he should be commended for not falling into the trap of buying a bunch of cars. The car he owned cash outright. He had no debt on that. That wasn't a liability. And the jewelry he owned, a lot of it was gold. And while I'll never know how much he paid for it, he still has some value. And, the Rolexes during this pandemic have increased a ton in value. And so that's something that I guess we can all learn. I don't know that I would buy, I'm not into watches like that, so I wouldn't buy a Rolex, I don't believe. And I haven't bought a Rolex. This is a good $300 or $400 Seiko. Shout out to Seiko. But it was good for his brand when he's on the court, on courtside, and he's got his chains on, and he's got that Chamberlain jersey, and he's got the gold Rolex on. It's good for his brand. There's so many photos of that. And as a rapper, he's kind of got to look the part. So clearly, I mean, he did a lot well. I had that in my his last concert video that I dropped a couple months ago, but his total assets as of the fall of 2020 were $4.1 million. So he won the game. In a country where 70% of our nation doesn't have 70% of the nation doesn't have $1,000 saved, he won. And he didn't have a lot of cash. He had assets which are going to continue to gain value, which are going to continue to create an income source for both his son and his daughter. And so if you have any thoughts on this, please comment, like, and subscribe. I've been slow making these videos. I've been busy here in the office. I handle a lot of tenant cases here in California. And it's just been a busy time with the moratoriums and some of the landlord behavior. But if you like this video, please comment. I'm going to make the video explaining why, not explaining it, because the truth is none of his corporations owned that shopping center, but I'll give you a great breakdown on that shopping center, who owns it, and what we know about that ownership of the shopping center from publicly available information. And so if you got this far, I appreciate you. Please like and subscribe. Please comment. And hopefully I'm going to continue to make videos. And again, if you take one thing away from this video, if you have any real assets, in my opinion, what I would do is I would get a living trust. I think that it's faster. If Nip had, for instance, living trust, his assets could have been distributed within months. And the probate process is almost over 2 years. It's going to be 3 years in April. And so it's just a faster process. There's less fees. And if you set up a living trust, you could distribute your assets the way you want to and intend to. So I know I said I was getting out of here, but just real quick. In Nip's case, his partner, Lauren London, will not get anything from the probate process because they weren't married. Whereas if he had a living trust, he could have made her a beneficiary of the living trust. He could have created things in his living trust to say, my kids aren't going to get their money or any money until they're 25, until they're 30, until they do X, Y, and Z. And so, but if you do it through the probate system, none of that's going to happen, especially if you don't have a will. So not only did he not have a living trust, which means that he goes to the probate system, he had no will, so they're going to distribute his estate per code, and per code it's only going to go to his kids. Now, if he didn't have any kids, it would go back to his parents. If his parents were deceased, which they aren't, but if they were deceased, it would go to his brother. So there's basically a formula. Anyway, I went on too long. Please like and subscribe. I appreciate you if you got this far. Please throw please throw a 6 in the comments if you got this far to let me know that you got this far in the video. I appreciate you. Salute.